Good evening, everyone. We are in the 22nd video of this series. And this evening, member of our foundation and society, Ümit Özdemir joins me as the commentator. Welcome, dear Ümit.
Thank you for inviting me. And good evening, everyone.
Yes, let me start reading from where we stopped last week. Beings are not introduced immediately into the organizations of duty which begin above the stage of humanity, that is, above the hydrogen atom cycle. For this, it is necessary to have attained a proper level of comprehension in accordance with the necessities of the plan of duty. And this occurs only after a long, even longer cycle of preparation, starting from the most primitive stages of the hydrogen cosmos to its uppermost stages. We had previously talked about the phases needed to pass through for the comprehension to acquire such a merit of duty, starting from the initial state of being to the state of highest level human beings. At the beginning of these phases, as a start for the most primitive advancement of organization system, a kind of communal life begins in plants, with automatic mechanical instincts. These communities become more comprehensive as the lives of beings advance and widen their meaning. In animals, this community is rather clearer. Although a community life has not yet started, meaningful ensembles, expressing the preliminaries towards it, exist among animals. Automatic ensembles of ants, bees, and some animals that live together as a group are examples of these. These are the organized preparations of those beings which are candidates for communal plans in human life. Naturally, there are superior influences and bonds that connect them to each other. And these come from the beings in duty working at these fields. In this way, ant colonies are organized to collect their winter provision, similarly, bee colonies as well. Sometimes, in order to protect their nests against the preying eagles, all storks around gather and fight against these monsters as an army. Some wild animals, when they are hungry, make a herd and hunt. These states, which are frequently seen among animals, are brought out by influences sent by the beings in duty to allow them to do the instinctual application of the preparations for a superior communal plan. Finally come the gatherings and communal lives of mankind, which are again partly automatic and partly semi-comprehending. Here then start the direct and closest preliminary applications of attaining higher duty organizations. And the purpose of human life is to complete the necessary preparations on this path. Furthermore, there is the reciprocal organism state of the being that builds and governs a human, with the body of that man. That being, by prevailing on the magnetic field it constituted out of the human nervous system cells, governs the whole body, the organism through these cells. Here, the being is the organizer and the body is the organism. Activities of all these ensembles, of these organizations, of these systems, of every matter ensemble, of communal systems, of combinations, their relations to each other, in short, each event, each state, everything, is ensured only by this mechanism of influences within the great harmony of the divine order.
As you read this passage, I was having technical problems and somehow, this is a fresh example of a human being's test and trial with matter. My laptop didn't work, so I put my mobile phone into a water glass and now it is stable. I am in joy of mastering this small test. Yes, here, as the book states, starting from the most primitive stages of the hydrogen cosmos till now and here, everything we do here for the aim of reaching the plan of duty, this is our destination. And for this to happen, our necessary abilities have to be developed, and this is not only valid for the stage of human. From the moment the being is built, the being needs to go through certain stages of development, and I'd like to list those stages in the correct order: the most primitive plant cell, the self-contained plant body, the most primitive animal cell, various animal and human cells except brain cells, animal brain cells, self-contained animal body, human brain cell, subhuman stage which is stated as a stage between human and animal stages, and finally human body. And during this almost eternal journey of development, there is necessities particular to each life, each body, each state. And now, here, We are in the stage of completing the necessities particular to the human body so we can reach to the plan of duty. And in order to be able to reach that field of cooperation and coordination, that level of comprehension, here, we need to acquire certain values, we need to develop and reveal certain abilities. Only after these are developed and revealed, we will be included in that stage. And we can do this only by getting developed gradually, step by step. Maybe, our friends who read the earlier books of Mr. Ruhselman, he had wrote that gradualness is a principle. And, here when we read this sentence, we can easily see the gradual developmentary stages I just briefly listed. Let me read. We had previously talked about the phases needed to pass through for the comprehension to acquire such a merit of duty, starting from the initial state of being to the state of highest level human beings.
And, in our previous videos we read and commented on the book with first Bilgehan and later with Tümerhan, we had discussed the phases and stages the spirits and matter go through until this initial state of being. Spirits, when initially termed novice, gain experience with the swiftly developing matter by first connecting to atoms and, after an almost eternal stage of passive and automatic adaptations to matter, they become experienced by forming, deforming and transforming matter parts or particles. And eventually, spirits reach the state of being. And when spirits reach that stage, they build bodies from the disarrayed high-level energies of the superhydrogen cosmos matters, and these beings immediately build bodies from the matter of the hydrogen cosmos. And for the being starts the stage of building plant cells, starting from most primitive versions. Now, what we describe in a few sentences, of course, takes eternally long time. Please remember this. And when we talk about a most primitive plant cell, we should not underestimate the organization needed to sustain it. Even the most primitive cells respond to stimuli and interact with other cells in their vicinity. We had shared many examples in our previous videos. So, as the being builds such a primitive plant cell gets developed by primitive instincts and be in service to the spirit that built this being by getting more developed, by increasing its field of influence, by expanding its scope until the being reaches the stage of animal. At this stage, the being begins to organize a primitive animal cell, then an animal body and continues its development with instincts and automatisms. And these will further the being's development towards the stage of human by gaining intuitions and comprehension. Yes, let's underestimate the ability of building and organizing a primitive plant cell. It is the first step in the long journey the being embarks on for reaching superior communal plans. And here, in this passage, we read the examples preliminary communal work among animals. If we watch nature documentaries, we can intuit the divine order and organizations behind the appearances of all those migrations, hunting, building colonies, or extended family groups of animals.
Here, another point we need to emphasize is that in this organizing of animals as colonies etc., there is intense influencing by the beings in duty. The automatism's aim is to adapt those animals to live together as meaningful ensembles, as a preparation to further communal plan. When compared to our current communal or organizational examples we display in our human stage, the states described here has a rather mandatory quality. That is, as animals hunt, live or migrate together in groups it is not possible to say that they are not aware of doing this. It is explicitly written in this book, let me read. These states, which are frequently seen among animals, are brought out by influences sent by the beings in duty to allow them to do the instinctual application of the preparations for a superior communal plan. So, the importance of communal living is emphasized here. Indeed, is it possible for a human to get developed by living an isolated life? Without interacting with others and consequently, without making mistakes, comparisons, without understanding what is good or bad? When we read the divine order and the universe, we understand that this is not the aim for humans. Our aim is to learn communal living, cooperation, coordination. In the further pages of this book, we will read the examples of larger versions of these communal organizations we read in this passage. And all those preliminary works the beings do in all those stages is for becoming able to be included in the plan of duty, and for this, our nature, our disposition needs to be suitable for this plan. Our comprehension needs to be suitable for this plan. Our abilities should be developed in this direction. As the saying goes, as above, so below, we see these strata in organizations we humans build and act in accordance with the obligations and responsibilities particular to those organizations. The organ-organizer symmetry is seen in our organizations, as well. For example, we see this in the military or civil service as superior-subordinate relations, or in the business life, as well. Superiors control and check the subordinates.
And we see this organ-organizer symmetry within our body.
Yes, when we consider the cells making up the tissues, tissues making up the organs, organs making up the organ systems, and all of these is managed by the influences the being sends to the magnetic fields of the brain cells, by distributing these influences in a regular and graded manner, etc. Actually, as our elders said, the body is the miniature of the universe.
A small-scale universe.
Yes, a small universe. And, as small universes, we are learning together with the other small universes in a communal way so we can become included in the greater universe. And how? By achieving a certain level of conscience, we begin to care about others than our own personal needs, we care about our family, work to provide for them, and as our conscience gets developed, we become more communal by making connections with other people who have no blood or familial relations with us. But as we do this more and more, we begin to see that we are not that different at all, there is a stronger bond connecting us, and begin to comprehend that each of us help to one another in our development, knowingly or unknowingly. And, like this, what started as personal benefit gradually transforms to communal benefit, that is, the intuition of duty.
And in this passage, the book reminds us the purpose in the stage of human, I read, and the purpose of human life is to complete the necessary preparations on this path.
Exactly. And this is the best reply to give whenever we hear someone say, "What is my life purpose? I want to discover my purpose in life." The answer is, develop these necessary abilities and progress towards the intended destination. Many times I observe that people, especially if they are new to the spiritual teachings, ask such questions, as if there is a special duty has to be assigned to them. But isn't the duty stated in this book special enough? Our foremost duty is to develop ourselves, and as our comprehension widens and our conscience gets developed, the others around us will greatly benefit from this. It is like the natural selection in the positive sense, because a person with a wider comprehension naturally acts with an altruistic consciousness oriented toward communal betterment.
That is, living within the community, within organizations, working with others. The aim for us taking duties and responsibilities within organizations by becoming more flexible emotionally, mentally, and this will naturally lead us to becoming able to reach the plan of duty. All of us know very well, maybe too well that, within our automatic and semi-comprehending states, we are unable to build organizations as a whole. Because each of us, as everything else in the matter universe, is a duality unit, that is, we have two sides within us, a side directed to the self, to the earthly cravings, and another side directed to duty. And because we progress by choosing and making decisions from both sides, our progress is sometimes stalled and, even within organizations, our egoistical side comes forth. Still, consequences of such choices, which are mostly suffering and leading more tests and trials, force us making better choices by taking account of the communal or organizational aims, or in other words, force us to make more conscientious acts and decisions and to take more responsibilities. And when you mentioned this search for a special purpose in life, this reminded me this example, even a small bolt in a plane is very important. We cannot say this is just a small, insignificant bolt because the wholeness of this plane to be airborne depends on this bolt. In this sense, everyone and everything in the universe, in its current existential state, location and level of comprehension, is in service to the continuity of the whole and to the expansion of its scope and comprehension. So, let's underestimate a primitive plant cell or a bolt. In short, as the divine order and the universe emphasizes again and again that our main duty in the stage of humanity is to become more developed, to increase the capacity of our conscience. One of our friends asked a question. Is there anyone without duty? I think, at this point, we need to be more clear about this concept of being in duty. Here, in this passage we read, the purpose of human life. We don't read the duty of human life. We humans are getting prepared for the plan of duty. And in this sense, we are not beings with duty. We are just beings widening their scope in order to reach the stage of becoming beings in duty.
Yes, and also, in the divine order and universe, this distinction is made in the further pages we will read in this series. Let me say this as I remember, for humans in the world, obligation of duty is out of question. Because, the superficial time comprehension in the world don't let the execution of such duties. For human, to be able to take on such duties, we need to go through preparatory stages, and the most important of those stages is to develop their conscience. Yes, I can add this as a reply.
And the last sentence of this passage, we read, activities of all these ensembles, of these organizations, of these systems, of every matter ensemble, of communal systems, of combinations, their relations to each other, in short, each event, each state, everything, is ensured only by this mechanism of influences within the great harmony of the divine order. So, be it by the secondary influences or the influences sent by the Spirit, we see that the whole system works within inter-influences between this organ-organizer strata, all the way down. And, let me remind our friends that we had discussed the mechanism of influences in our previous videos, and if they watch these videos by studying this passage, they may gain more insights into this topic. Alright, let's continue reading. At each organism, there arrives a great number of secondary and lateral influences from above, from sides, from beneath, that among these there are both positive influences facilitating the duty of that organization and negative influences which are jarring, disruptive and even destructive in order to strengthen it, to increase its refining experiences, to develop and evolve it. And these cause the occurrences of the applications of this organism for tests and trials, experience and observation. All of these secondary influences come from a great number of beings working with comprehension or automatically for the cultivation of that organism. These beings in duty, connected to the sublime universe mechanism, put many events which are aggravating, obstructing, and sometimes precluding, as evolutionary material, on the path of beings in order to make ground for them to display efforts which will allow them to succeed in their duty within their bodily lives. These materials are regulated and ordered in accordance with the laws of the divine order, in order to enable beings to increase their merit, to strengthen and to ascend by shifting to higher states. However, because of their ignorance, mankind always considers these as disasters befalling them.
Yes, there are many events we encounter in life, and especially the events, situations or incidents that we feel as heavy, disastrous, frustrating are regulated as such for our development. We sometimes the silver lining in such events only after, with hindsight. This reminded me a lecture Mr. Ruhselman gave in the Ankara University. I think, at some point he was saying, man, as he walks toward his destination, sometimes he comes up such a wall that he can neither go over it nor he can go under it. He needs to walk to his destination, so he needs to detour around it. Man doesn't know that the reason the laws of nature erected this wall on his path is to strengthen him by walking longer, because further in his path there are conditions which he needs to be stronger for. Man thinks that this is hardship, an extra trouble, and feels this as a disaster, but actually it was for preparing him to these future situations. I had listened a voice recording of this lecture, and I remember this example whenever I feel any hardship in my personal life.
So, in this sense, hardships strengthen our life muscles. Just like weightlifting for strengthening our muscles. No matter how hard it is, this is a desired hardship people willingly do for become stronger. Similarly, all those hardships, harsh conditions we encounter in life strengthen a being's life muscles.
And I can add this, as well. So, we are told that the purpose of the human life is to reach the plan of duty. And again, as we read here, a great number of influences from above, from sides, from beneath, be it positive or negative. And when we lose sight of our true purpose or destination, and as we forget our true purpose and true needs, we can easily pursue some other and artificial needs, and we begin to want more and more of these. And at such points in our life, when we encounter some events which carry the intention of putting us back in the right track, we feel very disappointed. Or we embark on a secondary path for reaching a more attractive aim, and we pray and beg to reach it, and when that thing becomes unattractive or that path is closed off to us, again our disappointment is big. Only with hindsight, we see that all those disruptions and cessations are events to make us to change our path. And this passage also remind me the life story of Mr. Ruhselman. He had a musical career, he had education abroad for his career, but when the financial situation of his benefactor went bad, Mr. Ruhselman had to come back to his homeland. Now we say fortunately, but he was a young man at that time. Maybe he had ideals as a violinist, but he came back home, studied medicine, and became a physician. None of us has the foresee the future cause and effects of the steps we take today. Even though he came to this world as a human being with a certain duty, he was still in a human body, under the human condition. Yes, he had come back home, become a physician and worked on his true path, and here, we read this book, the divine order and the universe, as the fruit of his work.
And even before this, he had this intuition within him, but he couldn't pinpoint it. At some point, he wanted to become a martyr, so he wanted to join the military to fight in the World War I. But what happens? A synchronicity. A military officer, Mustafa Kemal, who would be known as Ataturk, overhears this desire of this young man and directs him to another path, that is, to his true path. By the way, if our friends want to learn more about the life of Mr. Ruhselman, they can watch the first video of this series.
Yes, and those frustrations, those disappointments happen in life for all of us. If we look back at our younger age, when we were inexperienced in life, we can see the desires, demands, dreams we had back then, and now we say, it's good that none of these came true. Yes, we mentioned that there are positive influences supporting us and the negative influences strengthening us, but let's think the opposite of this. Imagine a human who are aware of his true needs, working on this direction, who wants to enrich his organism with those supporting influences or higher values. This may lead that person to close off the parts of his organism that can sympathize with lower influences. So, from a worldly perspective, this person may seem having troubles or bad luck, but from a higher perspective, that person is gaining so much. So, the worldly appearances can be deceiving.
There is another question from a friend. What kind of lessons we can take from a seemingly destructive event for our spiritual development? We need trying to understand what is the message of an event as such, in which way this event helps our development. Most of such events happen to increase our capacity for love and compassion. Sometimes a person experiences this with the loss of a child or a pet. Or we see persons who have disabled children to be directed to increase their capacity for love and compassion no matter how hard the situation is. But sometimes people can't do this. Sometimes they abandon their babies or children. They shirk their responsibilities, but a similar yet rather more intense situation emerges in their life. On the other hand, people who have no children may display such a capacity of conscience that they take more encompassing responsibilities for such a child, or for the benefit of all disabled children. There are such parents who started to work for making the life of their own disabled children better and found themselves working for other disabled children by building organizations, societies, educational programs, etc. In a way, they shoulder such duties with ease because their life muscles were strengthened with their prior experience with their own child. And we see all kinds of hardships in the life stories of all human beings with duty. Just think about prophets, trailblazers, great initiates. There were obstacles, troubles, hardships on their paths, too, and such events kept on happening until the moment of their deaths. Because even the degree of comprehension we have, the emotion and the thought we have as we give out our last breath, are still a part of our tests and trials.
Even though the events look similar, the conditions and quality they carry are different. So, for a person encountering such an event, it is important for that person to interpret it with the personal dynamics. Because, external comments or interpretations made by others about an event are useful only up to a point. The result will depend on the personal dynamics and the degree of self-knowledge of the person. For example, if Edison listened to this sentence supposedly said by Einstein, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results," Edison could give up doing his experiments with light bulb. Therefore, sometimes a negative event happens for us to become more persistent, to increase our efforts, intention. And sometimes, consecutive negative events happen for us to change the causes so they can lead to different effects. In short, our personal dynamics is important when we try to see the lessons we need to learn from an event. Again, at such points in life, the determining factor will be our state of conscience as we are interpreting the event.
One of our friends shared this comment: "If your world turned upside down, don't give up, maybe the downside is better than the upside." Well, we live our life by following and repeating patterns, and no matter how bad the situation of our life patterns, we tend to sustain these as they are. We don't want to change these. Yes, everything is constantly changing, but changing our life intentionally is not an easy feat. You know, our elders were encouraging us to do simple exercises of the intentional suffering. If you always get out of the left side of the bed, try getting out of the right side of it, or if you always taking the right sidewalk as you go to work, try taking the left sidewalk. Even these simple exercises were so informative about our automatisms. The more our actions are automatic, the less impressions and information we receive from our actions. And what is called awakening is becoming aware of our automatic ways of behaving, thinking, and feeling. When we can understand our repetitive ways, we can spend efforts to break out of these so we can move on to changing our habitual ways. The system demands this from us. As the example you gave, a wall is erected on our path. We can go over it by climbing, we can go under it by digging a tunnel, we can make a contraption to leap over it, etc. Either symbolically as in the myths, fairy tales, or in our physical life on this world, as the highways or railways, we know the examples of overcoming the seemingly impossible heights of mountains. Yes, let's continue reading. We have said that organizations, as ascending higher and higher, come to an end at the unitary which is in the uppermost boundary of universe. Until they reach the unitary, these organization components, adapting to the sublime necessities of the original principle, gradually unite, such that, at the time they enter the unitary, their comprehensions have adapted to the sublime necessities at every point and with complete merit, except a few small nuances, and then they continue with sublime, universe-encompassing activities, without obeying the imperatives of organizer, organ as they have done downwards, within a single and immense unity of organization which cannot be grasped by the minds of mankind. This is a truth where the force of the original principle belonging to the universe and spirits joins with all possibilities of our universe. Looking at this side of it, from our point of view, we call it the unitary. 4. The powers of the original principle belonging to spirits and universe constitute a unity there with the whole universe. Therefore, as organizations get closer to the unitary, with the corresponding increase in comprehensions, freedoms, and responsibilities, the speed of the progress towards unity increases. States of organizer-organ relations increasingly loosen and eventually vanish. Then, the universal unity that we call the unitary is established. Further explanation will be given on this topic. Yes, the structuring of this book is so interesting. I mean, at one passage, we read about the most primitive plant cell, then a few pages later, comes an intense knowledge about the unitary. While pointing the most basic, the initial steps, next it points to the uppermost point in our journey. I find it fascinating each time I read this book.
Yes, when I read this book for the first time, some parts were too heavy for me to understand. Especially the first 50 pages demanded hard study from me. And imagine if one of us were compiling these spiritual communiqués, what would be the first sentence to start with? I mean, it is so obvious that this structuring is beyond an ordinary level of comprehension.
Yes, this flux of higher influences is obvious in the intensity of the knowledge given and also in the sequencing of the passages. You know, we have a saying in our culture for good teachers, they pound the knowledge in their students' minds. In that sense, the divine order and the universe expounds this knowledge to us by revisiting the previous contents but expanding their meanings, and by taking us back and forth from the initial stage of the universe and its uppermost point of the universe. And here, in this passage, we read that the organizer strata get less and less as the beings in the plan of duty get closer to the unitary, and most importantly, we read, as organizations get closer to the unitary, with the corresponding increase in comprehensions, freedoms, and responsibilities, the speed of the progress towards unity increases. Their responsibilities are not decreasing, on the contrary, increasing. Therefore, in order to be included in the plan of duty, the beings need to widen their capacity of responsibilities and comprehension, and after a point, the organizer strata loosen and beings gradually start to become one with the unity of the unitary. In the words of the book, the harmony we long for.
Responsibility is the accelerating factor, here. When the book gives details about the stage of humanity, we read that the development of beings and evolution of spirits accelerate with the stage of human, and the reason is the sense or feeling or intuition of responsibility that emerges in the human beings. For example, we read this book and say, yeah, it is good to know this, but continue to live as we do before reading this book. We just read in the previous passage that if we don't follow our path consciously, then we will encounter many disruptive events. However, now we know this, we are more responsible for changing our direction in life, willingly, knowingly. And here, in this passage, the plan describes the unitary as, where the force of the original principle belonging to the universe and spirits joins with all possibilities of our universe. So, a being that reached that stage, a being that is now included in the unitary is in a point of obliging of all necessities determined by the original principle and also, mastering all possibilities the matter universe responds in the face of these necessities. In a sense, for a being in that point, the whole universe is the body, as our bodies is the body for our beings. Yet at the same time, that being is a particle of that immense unity of comprehensions. A being in that point experiences becoming the universe. And in that point, there is no need for organ-organizer relation because this is the point the influences carrying the original necessities arrive at first. The uppermost point of the universe, that is, the unitary is the whole universe itself at that point. Well, I started by saying that the responsibility is the accelerating factor in the development of beings and evolution of spirits, but please don't misunderstand, the process of a being's reaching the plan of duty is eternally long. Yes, the progress accelerates and the applications are active, not passive as previously, but still this takes time, like an eternity. And during this eternally long process, the being progresses by becoming included in organizations, then by becoming included in higher organizations, and gradually in higher levels of higher levels. Let's think it like this. From governing a human body, to becoming a guide to a human being, then, to becoming a guide to a community, then, to governing a planet, a solar system, several solar systems, a galaxy, several galaxies, etc. And then, eventually, reaching the point of becoming the whole universe. And until reaching that point, there is a very long road to travel in the original timeline. And, in this passage, there is an interesting phrase like, except a few small nuances. It should not confuse us. If I remember correctly, in the earlier spiritual communiques received in the history of our society, there was this sentence: power is in ratio to comprehension. So, those beings are getting closer to the unitary, but they have their fields of power in ratio to their comprehensions. Yes, the scope and the structure of the organizations expands as they increasingly unite, but still, they have their own field of expertise. I think you and Tumerhan discussed these three cadres of duty last week. And imagine, the three different but complementing fields of expertise of these three cadres of duty become one at the unitary. But I think, those small nuances must be valid for the initial phase of this process of becoming united. Of course, it is obvious that at this point, everything is in total agreement. But I wanted to mention this phrase, in case that it confuses some of our friends.
Yes, we had mentioned these three cadres of duty last week. Let me briefly remind our friends. One of these is the cadre of the original principle. Another one is the cadre of mechanisms of destiny. And the third one is the cadre of the mechanism of time. All these cadres are in coordination, but they process with different subcadres or organizations. Yes, there was a question from another friend about the necessities. Let me read. Are the feelings, intuitions, influences are the necessities? I think, he asks if these are the original necessities.
Now, we read in this book that necessities are the states determined in the original principle. And for something to be a necessity, first there must be a need in the spirit in that direction. And since, there is no state in the universe that is outside of the necessities. And as beings, all we do and try to do it to render the necessities determined by the force of the original principle within our hydrogen cosmos. So, in this sense, every influence descending to our universe, to each duality unit carries a necessity. However, from our standpoint as human being, the necessity for us to widen our comprehension enough to discern the values of all those influences descending on us and also the influences we send out. Of course, it is natural to think that if nothing is arbitrary in this universe, whatever emerge in our minds, feelings etc. must be a necessity. Let's say you are a little bit sensitive and your neighbor is intensely thinking about the noise your children make, and without knowing this, you begin to think about your neighbor. But what is the necessity here? There are so many things surfacing in our minds, in our feelings all the time. Some of them are negative, some of them are positive. But mostly, such things surface in the direction of the values in our duality unit. So, we cannot deem all things rising within us as necessities. Not every sentence or idea of our inner voice tells us is a necessity. But of course, discerning which is directed toward the earthly cravings and which is directed to duty, or discerning why this sentence or that idea surfaced at that moment must be a necessity for becoming more comprehending, especially about ourself.
What we call as feelings, emotions or thoughts are the responses we give to all incoming influences within this matter universe through the filters of consciousness center via our biological system and our magnetic field. Due to our human condition in this dualistic system that is bound by the material limitations, we can only express our responses by feelings, emotions or thoughts and by acting upon these. For example, an influence comes and what do? You sense a pressure, a tightness etc. and you perceive it as a feeling, or everything you learnt since you are conceived in your mother's womb etc. brings out a thought and emotions accompany it, and depending the conditions, you feel happy or sad, or fear etc. So, these are not the necessities, especially not the necessities coming from the original principle. These are only mechanisms of the matter universe, or more correctly, mechanisms particular to this world and body. Because the being needs a body built from the crude matters of the hydrogen cosmos so it can be in service to the spirit. And also, all universe is in motion so the body the being built, in our case, our bodies, must be active, so all those sensations, feelings, emotions, thoughts, intuitions etc. are the activating factors. And even the most sublime forms of these are still of matter. And because of these activating factors, we act and live within myriad events. And in this journey toward the unitary, our being takes all those feelings, emotions, thoughts, sensations, etc., and asses all of these by comparing these with all of the previous experiences of other lifetimes and glean the essential knowledge it will convey to the spirit. So, in this sense, these factors are necessary for the being's service to the spirit, but these are not the original necessities. I hope our answer clarified this distinction sufficiently. Let's continue reading. At the initial sections of the cosmoses, in the initial crude hydrogen stage, there are not yet beings that spirits can govern. Because of this, such an organization system cannot be of question for them, and even ensembles of these spirits cannot be thought of. Here an administrative system exists which cannot be grasped by the minds of mankind, established by the original influences and allowing the mechanical evolutions of spirits. And under this administrative system, spirits are mechanically drifted on paths designated in accordance with the divine order. Through these applications in this manner, which take a very long time and have been passed through by spirits in passive states, these primitive spirits ascend gradually to the stage of being.
Here, again, the book reminds us the initial stages when spirits go through mechanical evolution under the control of an administrative system which we cannot understand. Our friends may remember the passages describing the novice spirits, how they drifted from matter to receive impressions about the swiftly developing matter, to observe the motions within matter particles, to adapt matter's motions and gain experience. And in this eternally long stage, the spirits were not able to control matter particles, let alone build a being. And what we see here, the evolution of the spirit begins from the first step of mastering most primitive, most basic particle of matter, and continues toward prevailing all particles of the whole universe through the being it will build to itself as a vehicle in the matter universe. Spirit, in this stage, I will use a very worldly example but, like a person who visits a foreign country and taking the subway, just looking around, trying to understand the layout, seeing an empty place and sitting there, later standing up, finding another seat. And we cannot talk about a communal sense or comprehension at this stage, but still the spirit has some actions which we cannot know about. Eventually, the spirit adapts to matter in a degree to become able gathering matter particles, and only then, the proto-hydrogen atom emerges.
As it is stated in this passage, the mechanical evolutions of spirits. They are drifted mechanically. And how something drifts. It cannot control itself, but it is controlled by a force. So, we read here, in this stage, spirits are unable to control matter. And again, I read, through these applications in this manner, which take a very long time and have been passed through by spirits in passive states, these primitive spirits ascend gradually to the stage of being. And in our previous videos, we had read and discussed the stages until the spirit reaches to the state of being. Yes, with this passage, the book takes it back to the initial phase of our matter universe, after giving some profound knowledge about the unitary.
And as the book emphasizes, mankind must know from where it is coming and to where it is going. After explaining where we are going to, the book doesn't let us to forget where we are coming from.
Yes, exactly. Let's continue reading. A body in the stage of being is an organism, as well. In it, among the particles constituting it, there are organizing and systemizations, as well. Because of this, as we have mentioned above, instead of the original principles' prime influences which pertain to matter, alongside the secondary influences, the original principles' powers pertaining to spirits which we call evolutionary values arrive at it from all around. Of course, these secondary influences are not unattended either. These are also states of the two basic influences we had previously mentioned as entering the universe, which are transmitted outside as altered after passing through beings and bodies. More correctly, these are the magnetic fields of beings. These secondary influences arrive at their targets on time, as needed and as regulated without even the smallest deviation, according to the individual and communal evolutionary needs of spirits and in accordance with the approbation and designation of the unitary. These influences, which are never unattended, are transmitted to the targets which are approved and designated for themselves, as subjected to a great number of administration, control, and assistance mechanisms. Although these most often exhibit a scene of disharmony and defeatism with thousands of conflicts, battles, controversies and dissensions among themselves, this state is an exterior appearance. In truth, all these are technical necessities of the compositions and mechanisms that occur to ensure the evolutionary imperatives and their opposite appearances which are deceptive to mankind.
This passage begins with stating that the being, as a body built by the spirit, is an organism, as well. Just as our bodies built by beings, the body of the being has also organizing and systemizations among the matter particles making up this body. And when we study the organizations within our body, as we mentioned, from cells to tissues, tissues to organs, organs to organ systems, this organ-organizer relation becomes obvious, and in our human stage, the main organizer of our body is our being. And here, among all those systemizations, an immensely complex interaction is going on which is beyond our daily consciousness. Here, we read, once the being is built by the spirit with the help of the beings of duty, the prime influences stop arriving at this ensemble of energies. Instead, evolutionary values pertaining to spirits begin to arrive at the being, besides the secondary influences. And now, the being has to build a body for itself as a vehicle in the hydrogen cosmos, and the being has to sustain or maintain this body. In our human stage, please consider the complexity of our human body, because there are billions of beings working in cooperation in this organ-organizer strata we mentioned. And each of these beings has its own process of development, has its own needs. And all the influences incoming to our organism must be suitable and regulated in accordance with the individual needs and development of all those beings, and also the needs and development of our being that is the main organizer of this human organism. And at points of its development when the being's current comprehension is not sufficient about these developmentary needs, these secondary influences are regulated accordingly. I think we can understand this phrase, these secondary influences are not unattended either, in this sense. The book states in the further pages that there are no stirrings in the universe that can be outside the control and directive of the unitary, outside of the knowledge of the unitary. Therefore, this is valid for all organ-organizer relations within our organism. And we had already mentioned that all those seemingly jarring, disruptive and even disastrous appearances in our world is regulated by the mechanism of destiny that takes developmentary needs of all beings into consideration by arranging such events. Yes, that's all I can say about this passage.
Yes, we see all those scenes of disharmony and conflicts, battles, controversies and dissensions in the whole body of humankind, and also as sickness, cancerations, mental illnesses etc. in our individual bodies. Yet, the book states that these are only appearances which are deceptive to mankind. That is, when we look at all these disruptions from our relatively lower system, we protest and say, where is the harmony you talk about? But from the perspective of the being and its relatively higher system, the book reminds us that everything is a duality unit, and for motion to occur there must be a flux of values from one polarity to other polarity within each duality unit. Therefore, be it within the duality unit of whole mankind or within the duality unit of our individual bodies, if we look at each and every point of emotional or mental or physical levels, these polarities are utilized to bring out activation or motion, hence, experience. So, we can say that all those appearances are because of the value differentiation continuously happening between the polarities of all duality units. And which is the greatest duality? It is the duality of spirit and matter. So, as you mentioned, we see in this passage that the importance of the evolutionary values is emphasized. By these influences coming from the spirits, this continuously happening value differentiation brings out all those appearances of disharmony. Because, after these evolutionary values enter and arrive at matter, let's say our bodies, these are utilized and consequently modulated, and then we send out these modulated influences from our magnetic fields as secondary influences. And in turn, these secondary influences arrive at other beings and brings out new value differentiations between the polarities in their duality units. And behind all these complex interinfluencing among objects and bodies in the hydrogen cosmos, there are intentional causes. Next week, in the pages we will read, more details will be given about these influences are governed and directed. Yes, dear friends, we thank you for your contributions with your questions, comments, and participation in this series. We hope our comments are bringing out many insights within you. See you next week. Good evening.
Good evening.